You're tuned to the Beacon KSJE 90.9 FM. I'm Nick Michael, and I'm sitting here with
Ashley Lundy.
And you are listening to A Review Too Far, where we watch movies and review them for your listening pleasure. This week, we have 1995's The Indian in the Cupboard. After that is Long Way North, and we're going to finish with out in theaters now, Slender Man. But let's get things started with The Indian in the Cupboard. It is a modern-day fantasy tale about a boy with a cupboard and a key that can turn plastic figures into real-life people. But he learns along the way that it didn't just pull them from thin air, but actually pulled them from their own lives, and the consequences that this action has on both him and his tiny friends.
Great Spirit?
Yes, little bear.
Tell me about the Onondaga God. Are we always a great people?
You are always a great people. But it's not always so good.
Things change for us.
They will.
We go.
The Indian in the Cupboard was directed by Frank Oz, based on the novel by Lynn Reed Banks and written for the screen by Melissa Matheson, and stars Hal Scardino, Lightfoot, Richard Jenkins, Rishi Bhatt, Steve Coogan, and David Keith. And let's talk about it. Ashley, what did you think of The Indian in the Cupboard?
This was my pick for this week, and I chose it because I had seen it as a child and loved the film, and I sort of wanted to revisit it now in adulthood. I think that it holds up really well. This is a charming tale. It's got a lot of sort of 90s nostalgia. There are no cell phones. There's no internet, really. It's just a boy playing with his toys in his room and his friend and those relationships with his family and his brothers. I think this is really endearing, and it's beautiful. I think that when you watch this film, you get a sense for the childhood nostalgia of playing with toys and what that means and the sort of adventures that you imagine for your figures and how those lives sort of maybe are different than what one might imagine. This is a Indian American person who truly has a life, and he's taken from his life to become a part of a young boy's fantasy, and it just is sort of strange and beautiful and sad and funny. I really like that. Steve Coogan has a couple of cameos as a World War I era British medic, and he is just absolutely charming. I like what he brings to the film. He does give it a little bit of levity, especially in some of the more interesting parts and some of the more scary parts of the movie. And I like the journey that our character goes on, our main character. He learns about life and death and the severity with which things happen for folks. I'll recommend Indian in the Cupboard. I think it's a classic that has endured the test of time, and kids today will like it. And if you're an adult who watched this as a kid, you'll probably like it too. And if you've never seen it before, I think you'll enjoy it.
Well, I too enjoyed The Indian in the Cupboard. It had been close to 20 years since the last time I saw this feature, and it is a sweet, endearing tale, kind of a low-key coming of age for Omri. And I like how the subtle messages play out over the course of the film concerning life and death, responsibility, both personal and familial, and how it's just kind of this gradual adolescence blooming into, albeit minor, maturity. I also really liked Steve Coogan. He was the levity that I really loved. I'm not as big a fan of David Keith. I think he did a great job being the cowboy, but it wasn't as plucky, I think, as Steve Coogan, but that's okay. Lightfoot, I think, did a great job as Little Bear, and the relationship that he has with Omri is basically the entirety of the feature, and it really works. I think that the effects, while dated, still hold up for their era. You can still see the seams, especially with current resolutions, but I enjoyed it, and I want to say that Frank Oz is a very underrated director when it comes to his features. He's done, I want to say, 8 or 9 features over the past 20 years, and he's a great performer as well as a director, and I think he did a good job here. It's sweet, it is sad. I think this is a good movie for parents to show their children, especially for the messages. And on that note, final thoughts. Ashley.
I love this movie. 4 stars.
I think it's a very solid child fantasy piece. I'm going to give it 3.5 out of 5 and say it's worth it. And that'll bring us to our second DVD of the week, and it is Long Way North, an animated feature. It is a French-Danish co-production that tells a Russian tale of a late 19th century aristocrat who goes on a search for her missing grandfather, who was looking for the Northeast Passage and to become the first person to reach the North Pole.
Stop it!
Everybody knows the device sank. It might as well show.
It can't go down. The Davai is unsinkable.
Darling, you're cute, but we spent 3 months looking for that ship, so believe me, it's sunk.
You looked in the wrong place.
And now she's going to tell us where to find it.
Yes, precisely.
What makes you think we were looking in the wrong place?
This navigation sheet. This is Ulukin's itinerary.
Where did you find that?
I am Sasha Chernetsov, Ulukin's granddaughter. I found it at my grandpa's. Captain Lund, Olga told me you could help me find the Davai.
She's a brave lass. Listen to her.
Long Way North was directed by Remy Chaillet and stars Chloe Dunn, Vivian Verns, Peter Hudson, Anthony Hickling, Thomas Saggles, and Jeffrey Greenhill. And let's talk about it. Ashley, what did you think of Long Way North?
This is a feature that I'd never heard of before I sat down to watch it, and it was sort of different. I really took a few minutes, I would say probably about 15 minutes to get used to the animation style, but once I did, I liked it a lot. I thought it was beautiful and really well done. I like the way in which motion's portrayed with this animation style, the movement of hair, the movement of clothing. It's done well. It's just a little different from like a Disney style animation. Nothing like that, in fact. I thought that the story was compelling, and one of the things that I want to give major props to the production studios for, and the writing and the directing, is that they really didn't pull any punches. There are sad parts of this movie. There's betrayal, there's hurt, there's shame, and they kind of embrace it. They embrace that life is going to be bad. Even when you're 15 and you're an aristocrat, it's going to have really terrible moments. I will say that I thought the ultimate resolution of the film you kind of saw coming a mile away, but that's okay. I'm willing to forgive that, since this seems to be directed more at kids than at adults, but it's still very enjoyable from an adult perspective. I watched this with an English dub, not the original, what I imagine was French, since most of the writing in the film, sort of the signs and things like that, were French. And I thought that the English voice actors did a great job. I felt the emotion. I thought that the pace and the tone matched what I was seeing on the screen, which doesn't always happen with dubbed animation, but it worked here, and I thought that was successful. If I had it to do over again, I think I would have enjoyed watching it in French with English subtitles, but either way, I think you'll have a good time. I'll recommend it.
I too enjoyed Long Way North, but I'm not sure if I'm necessarily going to recommend it. The story is very much a fatalistic one. It's not a happy ending for a lot of people involved, and it's not your typical animated fare, even though it does seem to be aimed for the young adult set. The story is, as Ashley said, compelling. It's the tale of a young aristocrat girl who defies her family to go off searching for her lost grandfather. And that seems like it would be a very Disney kind of narrative to go on, but it's not. It's rough. She's taken advantage of very early on. She finds very little help, and what help she does find comes at the price of her pride and her efforts. And it's a very human story. It's a very realistic story, but very fatalistic, and I think very Russian, so it's very apropos there. I liked the narrative. I do think it was predictable, as Ashley said, but overall, I think it's worth it. I wanted a few more things. Like, I wanted more from the prince who spurns her advice early on. We only get to see him in like a flashcard at the end of the film. And I think we needed more growth overall from a lot of the characters. But what little we did have was poignant and worth it. So I don't know if I'm going to quite recommend it, but I still enjoyed myself. And on that note, final thoughts. Ashley.
I'm actually willing to overlook and forgive a lot of the lack of character growth and a lot of the lack of completion in this tale, because this is Sasha's story and she's telling it from her perspective, and I'm good with that. I'm good with this just being about her journey and the growth that she experiences. I think that the other people in the film mostly serve as foils for her to look at something and say, this is how I learned about betrayal. This is how I learned about trusting my gut, etc. I'm okay with her being the most and pretty much only very well-developed character in the film. 3 stars.
Yeah, I think 3 stars is a fair rating, and I'm going to give it that myself. I liked this feature. I do think it was underdeveloped, and there were some loose threads that I wanted to see pulled back into the weave of the narrative. But overall, it's a pretty solid feature and worth seeing, save for one fantasy sequence towards the climax. That'll bring us to our cinema release of the week, and it is Slender Man, a PG-13 horror flick based on the very recent internet urban legend about a tall, pale man who haunts children, sometimes taking them away, sometimes killing them outright, sometimes just driving them mad.
All right, here it is. Those who hear the 3 bells toll accept his invitation. When you hear the first, you must close your eyes, keeping words unspoken. Opening your eyes only once you've heard the 3rd. Are you serious? This is for...
Slender Man was written for the screen by David Burke, directed by Sylvain White, and stars Joey King, Julia Goldani-Tells, Jazz Sinclair, and Annalise Basso. And let's talk about it. Ashley, what did you think of Slender Man?
I think Slender Man is another example of a horror movie that could have been truly terrifying with an R rating and some good acting. Unfortunately, there are neither of those 2 things in this film. It's a trope that PG-13 horror movies are not scary for good reason. They don't have generally the right kind of imagery or terror to really get you scared. This film is just not scary. It doesn't present you with any true fear, true lasting fear. And I think that's because in the beginning they explain how Slender Man is summoned, and it kind of is an easy, well, if I don't do that, I guess I don't have anything to worry about when you leave the theater. More so than that, though, the incredibly bad acting is distracting throughout this film. There's a group of 4 girls who are friends, who are the main characters, which I like that the main characters in this film are women. That's cool. But there's just really no chemistry between any of them, and I don't buy their relationships with each other or their characters at all. They seem really one-dimensional. Their fear is misplaced. It's just bad. It's just bad. I cannot give any good recommendations to this movie. Even the effects were cheesy. The Slender Man legends are kind of creepy. If you read them online, they're creepy and they're freak you out. But this film managed to take a truly scary premise and just sort of wrap it in cotton candy and deliver it to teenage masses, and it doesn't have any real lasting power. I'm not going to recommend this movie. I won't spoil the ending for you, but I just was not impressed from start to finish, and I think there's so much better stuff to see right now.
Well, I won't disagree with Ashley that there are better things out there in the theaters to see than Slender Man. But I have to admit, I kind of dug it. I do agree with her that the acting is bad, and the movie as a whole takes a really creepy premise. It is basically a creepypasta, and I really, really liked the legend of the Slender Man that developed on the internet over the past decade or so. But the story that we have here is really, really underbaked, and I do think it is laid at the feet of the fact that they're force-feeding you this mystery that no one really knows about from the start of the movie on, and it's basically trying to do a Cliff Notes version of the internet's development of this monster, and it's weak in that regard. I think they would have done a much better job if it had been rated R, and if they'd spent more time on the writing and developing a believable mythos that doesn't necessarily rely on the internet, and maybe would have played with the very real life occurrences that have happened, like the two girls who I think killed someone because they were trying to summon him. I think that the imagery is the strong point in this feature. There are some very creepy Silent Hill-esque visuals towards the end of the movie that are actually pretty well done, and I think that's where they spent the most of their effects budget on, and I really dug those individual visual effects, but the Slender Man effects overall are few and far between and never really all that fun. I think they were underbaked as well, so I think I'm going to give this a pass. This is a very niche horror film. I dug it. I think I might even pick it up when it's super cheap on DVD at some point, but I can't recommend it for horror fans or creepypasta fans. So on that note, final thoughts. Ashley.
Part of what makes the Slender Man mythos and the images that you see online and those things really creepy is that the Slender Man is always kind of out of focus. You don't really see him that clearly. He's in the distance. And so it adds to the idea that he could be watching you and you wouldn't know, and it's difficult to see the demon. When you see the demon and he's right up in your face and he's got the creepy wooden fingers, it's not as scary for some reason. I'm going to give this a hard pass. 0 stars.
Well, I'm not quite as negative as Ashley on this feature. I do think it is a weak horror flick. It's niche at best, and it may develop a cult following at some point, but I don't see a heck of a lot of potential. Its imagery are its best points, so I'm going to give it a weak 1.5 out of 5 and say save it for a bottom shelf rental. And that'll bring us to a close. If you have any questions, comments, and the like, please feel free to email. You can reach us at ksje@sanjuancollege.edu. Just make sure you put a review too far on the subject line, and we will be sure to get it. Any parting thoughts as we go, Ashley?
Yes, I'd like to thank Allen Theaters for bringing these films to our community and to KSJE and San Juan College for hosting our program.
And from the studios of KSJE, I am Nick Michael. I've been sitting here with
Ashley Lundy.
And we'll see you folks next week with more reviews and hopefully some recommendations coming up. Easy Rich Asians.